Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow, walking over to the mirror, and realizing that your physical appearance and, your bank account, your career trajectory have all suddenly morphed to perfectly match your hidden moral character.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a terrifying thought experiment for most of us.
Right. It really is.
Because if your empathy, your hidden habits, and your private integrity literally dictated your physical vitality and financial stability, the streets would just look entirely different.
Oh, absolutely.
You might see like a billionaire who suddenly is wearing rags and looking completely emaciated, barely able to stand.
Yeah, and on the flip side, you might see a quiet, humble school teacher who normally struggles to pay rent, suddenly glowing with absolute vitality and possessing immense wealth.
Exactly. The whole social hierarchy would just flip overnight.
Well, we're opening this deep dive with that terrifying thought experiment because the ancient text we are unpacking today uses that exact unforgiving standard to measure human success.
It really does.
We're looking at a deeply personal letter from the first century, known historically as 3rd John. And when I say it's brief, I mean it is the shortest book in the entire biblical canon.
Yeah, it's tiny. It's literally just a handful of sentences.
Right. It was written by a man who identifies himself simply as the elder, which is historically understood to be the Apostle John, to a highly respected friend named Gaius.
And our mission today is to sort of pull this letter out of the ancient archives and show you why it operates as this incredible masterclass in human character.
Yes, because it really is a masterclass.
It is. Within these few short verses, the author presents us with 3 incredibly distinct personality profiles.
Which are so recognizable even today.
Oh, completely. We have Gaius, who represents this profound generosity and a deeply grounded soul. Then we have Diotrephes, who is just the absolute embodiment of toxic ambition and ego-driven control.
The ultimate bad boss.
Exactly. And finally, we have Demetrius, standing as this quiet model of unshakable, objective integrity.
So this text really acts as a mirror for the listener.
Yeah, a very clear mirror.
As we work through the source material, and we're leaning heavily on the deep historical and theological commentaries from scholars like Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry today, we're going to confront some incredibly sharp questions.
Right, because this letter challenges the very metrics you use to evaluate your own life.
It really questions how you treat vulnerable strangers, and it forces a hard look at, the darkest corners of human ambition.
And I think what makes it so powerful is that because it is a personal letter, the observations aren't obscured by, lofty abstract theology.
No, not at all.
The author is writing to a friend about real people navigating real immediate problems in a fragile community.
Right. It cuts directly to the mechanics of how we interact, how we hoard power, and how we distribute resources.
It's incredibly practical.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start exactly where the letter starts, because the way John greets his friend Gaius establishes this baseline standard for human thriving that completely subverts our modern obsession with outward metrics.
It really does. The opening lines offer one of the most provocative greetings in all of classical literature.
How so?
Well, John writes, "The elder to Gaius the beloved, whom I love in truth." And then he follows that immediately with, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be healthy, even as your soul prospers."
Even as your soul prospers.
Yeah.
That phrase, that just flips the entire script on human development, doesn't it?
Completely. He is using Gaius's spiritual and moral health, his unseen inward character, as the absolute measuring stick for his physical and worldly success.
Right. He isn't hoping Gaius's character eventually matches his wealth.
No, exactly the opposite. He is hoping Gaius's physical reality can eventually catch up to the sheer magnitude of his character.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. And Albert Barnes zeroes in on the specific Greek terminology used here for prosper. The word is eudoustai.
Eudoustai. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, close enough. It translates literally to being led in a good way or having a prosperous journey.
Okay, so a prosperous journey.
Right. And in the vernacular of the first century Greco-Roman world, that word applied to success in commercial business, happiness in your domestic life, and robust physical health.
It was sort of the all-encompassing good life greeting.
Exactly. And Barnes highlights that John takes this really common cultural greeting and deliberately makes the prosperity of the soul the standard of his wishes.
Wow.
Yeah, and Matthew Henry's commentary builds on this by describing grace and health as 2 rich companions.
I love that phrase. two rich companions.
It's great, right? Henry notes the tragedy that a rich soul is frequently lodged in a frail or sickly body. But when inward grace and outward health actually align, a person's capacity to influence the world expands exponentially.
Let's apply that to the 21st century for a second. Because we have built an entire global economy around outward Yuodustai, right?
Oh, 100%.
I mean, we have wearable technology, tracking our sleep cycles and heart rates. We have credit scores. We obsess over follower counts and quarterly earnings.
We spend billions of dollars trying to project the image of a prosperous journey.
Exactly.
That's it.
So if someone told you today, I hope your business and your body look just like your secret moral life, most people would interpret that as a devastating curse.
Yeah, they would be terrified. And you are tapping into a reaction that scholars have noted for centuries, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Barnes quotes the 18th century writer Philip Doddridge on this exact dilemma.
Oh, what did Doddridge say?
Well, he remarked, "What a curse would this bring upon many to wish that they might prosper, even as their souls prospered."
That is painfully accurate.
Isn't it? Barnes expands the thought, writing, "Of how much property would they at once be deprived? How embarrassed would be their affairs? How pale and wan and sickly would they be, if they should be in all respects as they are in their spiritual interests?"
Okay, that brings us to a massive obstacle to growth for the modern listener. Because we are entirely conditioned to trust the facade.
We really are.
We evaluate leadership, competence, and value based on the pristine nature of the outside. But the wisdom of this ancient letter insists that all external metrics are secondary and often dangerously deceptive.
Yeah, inward reality, the quiet, uncelebrated reality of a person's faith, their patience, their secret generosity, is the only enduring wealth.
Everything else is just set dressing that will eventually collapse if the foundation is rotten.
Right. And John is communicating something profoundly affirming to Gaius here. He's basically saying, I know the health of your core when no one is watching.
He sees the real Gaius.
Yes. He's saying, it is so robust that my highest wish is for the material world to simply reflect what you have already achieved internally.
Which implies a life of deep, practiced authenticity. Gaius hasn't just adopted a philosophy. He has internalized it to the point where it defines his entire existence.
Exactly.
So I want to pose a question directly to you, the listener, drawn straight from this ancient standard. Look at your habits over the last 30 days.
Just the last month.
Right. If your physical health and your financial stability today were recalibrated to be a direct one-to-one reflection of your patience, your honesty, and how you treat people who offer you no advantage, would you be thriving?
That is a tough mirror to look into.
It is. Would you be running marathons? Or would you be on life support? It is a heavy, almost uncomfortable diagnostic tool, but it serves as the gateway to the rest of the letter.
It really sets the stage.
Because if Gaius possesses this prosperous soul, we have to look at how that soul operates in the real world.
Right, because inner health always has an external manifestation. And the text provides a highly specific example of that inner health.
So we move into verses 3 through 8.
Yes, which detail the mechanics of ancient hospitality. Gaius's prosperity of soul is demonstrated almost entirely by his treatment of people who are in no position to reciprocate.
Now, we need to set the historical context here to understand why this was so radical. This letter is addressing a specific logistical crisis in the first century world, right?
Yes, very specific.
The narrative focuses on these strangers and brethren traveling through the region. Who are they?
So the early Christian movement, before it had dedicated buildings or institutional infrastructure, relied on a network of traveling teachers and missionaries.
Okay, so they were constantly on the move.
Exactly. These individuals walked the Roman road system from city to city, disseminating their teachings. And the text highlights a crucial strategic policy these travelers adopted.
What was the policy?
Well, verse 7 states, for the sake of the name, they went out, taking nothing from the Gentiles.
Wait, so they deliberately refused financial compensation from the local pagan populations they were addressing?
That's right. They took absolutely nothing.
That seems like a massive handicap if you're trying to fund a global movement. How do you survive if you won't take donations from the public?
It was a calculated handicap.
Yeah.
Designed to solve a severe credibility problem in the Greco-Roman world.
A credibility problem.
Yeah. The Mediterranean basin at that time was completely saturated with traveling philosophers, rhetoricians, cynics, and priests of various mystery cults.
Oh, so there was a lot of competition for an audience.
Tons of competition.
Yeah.
And many of them operated essentially as intellectual grifters.
Grifters. I love that term for ancient philosophers.
Well, it fits. They would arrive in a town, perform these big oratorical feats in the public square, and then demand payment or aggressively solicit funds.
So it was just a hustle.
It was a highly transactional, often mercenary gig economy. So, to distinguish themselves from these wandering charlatans, the early Christians refused to charge the public.
I see.
They needed to prove their message was driven by pure benevolence, not financial extraction.
But that strategic decision creates an immediate vulnerability. I mean, if they aren't crowdsourcing funds from the public square, they still have to eat.
Right. You can't eat good intentions.
Exactly. They still need a safe place to sleep in a world where roadside inns were notoriously dangerous, right? Weren't they often doubling as brothels and hubs for thieves?
Oh, absolutely. Roadside inns in antiquity were incredibly dangerous places, so these travelers were entirely dependent on the private hospitality of local believers.
They needed patrons.
Yes. They relied on individuals with the resources and the willingness to open their homes. And John writes this letter to commend Gaius because some of these traveling teachers had returned to John's home base and testified publicly about Gaius's extraordinary support.
Let me grab the quote for that. Verse 5 reads, "Beloved, you do a faithful work in whatever you accomplish for those who are brothers and strangers."
And Matthew Henry's commentary draws special attention to Gaius's mindset here, highlighting what he calls a Catholic spirit.
Now, when Henry says Catholic spirit, he doesn't mean the Roman Catholic Church, right?
No. He means Catholic in the literal sense of the word universal, or broad-minded, a broad-minded approach to charity.
Right. So Gaius isn't just taking care of his own local faction.
Exactly. He transcends the tribalism that usually dictated ancient charity. You see, in the Roman world, the patronage system, the clientela, was highly structured.
How did that work?
Well, you gave resources to your clients, and in return, they gave you public loyalty, political support, and elevated your social status.
So it was very much a you scratch my back, I scratch yours situation.
100%. It was a reciprocal economy of favors, but Gaius completely dismantles that dynamic.
By helping strangers.
Yes. He provides food, shelter, and financial backing to strangers from faraway people who can offer him zero social capital in his local city. He supports them simply because they are working for the truth.
And John pushes this standard even further, doesn't he? He tells Gaius to send these travelers forward on their journey in a way worthy of God, or after a godly sort.
Yeah, that phrasing is incredible.
He is elevating the standard of hospitality from mere survival to divine dignity.
Right. Matthew Henry breaks down the implications of that phrase beautifully. He argues that Christians should consider not only what they must do, but what they may do.
What they may do. I like that distinction.
It's profound. What they may most honorably and laudably do, it requires an expansive generosity. You don't just hand a traveler a stale loaf of bread and point them toward the city gates.
Good luck out there.
Exactly, no. You stock their provisions for the road ahead, you ensure they have safe passage, you treat them with the honor you would afford to a visiting dignitary.
You essentially act as the economic engine for their mission.
You do.
Here's where it gets really interesting for the modern listener. John writes in verse 8, "We therefore ought to receive such that we may be fellow workers for the truth."
Fellow workers.
Or, as the older translations call it, being fellow helpers. That phrase fundamentally democratizes the concept of world-changing work.
It really does. It completely flattens the hierarchy between the person holding the microphone and the person paying the electric bill.
That is such a great way to put it. Because not everyone possesses the specific calling or the rhetorical skill or, frankly, the freedom from domestic responsibilities to walk the ancient roads.
Or, in modern terms, to be on the front lines of a major movement.
Right. John's argument, which is heavily emphasized in the commentaries, is that the individual providing the logistical and financial infrastructure is just as vital as the individual delivering the message.
They are inseparable. By utilizing his resources to support these strangers, Gaius becomes a joint participant in their labor.
His quiet domestic hospitality makes him an equal partner in the propagation of truth.
It's a beautiful concept.
Let's bring that into the present day. Because we are constantly surrounded by causes, by necessary truths that require defending, by people dedicating their lives to social, spiritual, or communal reform.
Yeah, everywhere you look.
And the modern instinct is to believe that if you aren't the spokesperson, if you aren't the activist going viral, you aren't really part of the solution.
We definitely have a very performative view of making a difference.
Exactly. But this text demolishes that idea. It forces us to look at our homes, our professional networks, and our bank accounts as tools for partnership.
Because the invisible infrastructure of any societal shift requires patrons. It requires a Gaius.
Yes.
And adopting that role demands a profound level of humility.
Yeah.
You are deliberately choosing a position where you will not receive the spotlight.
You are funding the journey, you are providing the rest, you are absorbing the cost, while someone else receives the public recognition for the work.
Which is hard for a lot of people to swallow.
It really is. So the practical reflection here is immediate. Who are the strangers, the truth tellers, or the exhausted workers in your community right now who need your logistical backing?
That's a great question.
Are you willing to be the quiet patron of something good? When a person doing difficult, meaningful work crosses your path, do you view their needs as an irritating interruption to your schedule? Or do you view it as an opportunity to become a fellow worker in their cause?
Gaius definitely saw it as a privilege. He leveraged his prosperity to facilitate truth.
Who did? And that expansive, welcoming mindset serves as the thesis of a healthy community. But the letter does not let us linger in that warmth for long, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It executes a jarring, almost violent pivot.
We move from the open doors of Gaius to the sound of doors being aggressively slammed shut and deadbolted.
Yeah, it's quite a tonal shift.
We are introduced to the second character study, the dark mirror of Gaius, a man named Diotrephes.
Yes.
We go from a masterclass in generosity to a clinical dissection of toxic leadership. Verse 9 introduces him with a very specific condemnation. John writes, I wrote at the assembly, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, doesn't accept what we say.
Who loves to be first? That isn't just a passing critique. It is the diagnostic key to his entire pathology.
The diagnostic key. Explain that.
Well, Albert Barnes focuses intensely on the Greek terminology used here. The word is philoproton.
Philoproton.
Right. It is a rare compound word occurring nowhere else in the New Testament.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just here. It means loving the preeminence or possessing an insatiable desire to be at the head of all things, to dictate and to lord authority over others.
So he is driven entirely by ego.
Completely.
And what is brilliant about this text is that it doesn't just call him arrogant and move on. It maps out the exact logistical progression of his toxicity.
It really does read like a manual.
It does. If you look closely, verses 9 and 10, John outlines a 5-step escalation of control that reads like a modern playbook for a hostile corporate takeover.
Yeah, let's look at those steps.
Let's trace how a man who loves to be first actually dismantles a community. The first move is always to cut off external communication.
Right. He intercepts and rejects legitimate authority. John notes, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes does not receive us.
So he suppresses the elder's letter.
Exactly. In any organizational structure, an authoritarian leader must first create an information silo.
They have to control the narrative.
Yes, he acts as the ultimate gatekeeper, ensuring that the community only hears his interpretation of reality. If external voices of authority or wisdom are allowed in, his preeminence is threatened.
You can't just hide information forever. Eventually, people will ask why they aren't hearing from John anymore.
Right. They'll start asking questions.
So, logically, his next move has to be discrediting the source.
Yeah.
You have to destroy the reputation of the person whose authority you are usurping.
Which brings us to the second step of his escalation. Character assassination.
The smear campaign.
Exactly. John writes that Diotrephes is unjustly accusing us with wicked words, and Barnes explores the Greek word behind unjustly accusing or prating, which is fluario.
Fluorio.
Yes. It derives from the root fluo, meaning to boil over or to flow.
Oh, that paints a vivid picture.
Doesn't it? It describes a continuous overflowing stream of idle, malicious talk. It isn't a single formal accusation brought before a council.
It's not an official grievance.
No, it is the insidious, constant drip of gossip designed to slowly erode confidence in anyone who might challenge his position.
That is such a recognizable dynamic.
Yeah.
It's the water cooler whisper campaign.
Yeah. Did you hear what John has been up to?
Are we really sure we can trust his judgment anymore?
Exactly. It's designed to make the community feel like Diotrephes is the only safe, rational leader left.
Wow. And once he has isolated the community and discredited his rivals, he moves to step 3, which directly attacks the vulnerable.
Right. Step 3 transitions from verbal manipulation to physical exclusion. John writes, neither doth he himself receive the brethren.
So he explicitly refuses to offer the hospitality that defined Gaius.
He shuts his own doors to the traveling teachers. They represent an outside influence that he cannot control, so they must be denied resources.
But shutting his own door isn't enough for an authoritarian, is it?
Never.
He can't stand the idea of anyone else demonstrating compassion
Okay.
because it highlights his own lack of it. So step 4 is where the control mechanism really tightens.
Yes. The text says, he forbids them that would.
He actively legislates against generosity within his community.
He turns charity into a punishable offense.
That is wild.
It is. If a member of the local church wants to take a traveler in for the night, Diotrephes intervenes and prohibits it. He demands that the entire group adopt his hostility.
And if someone defies his mandate,
That leads to the 5th and final step, the ultimate weapon of toxic power. He throws them out of the assembly.
excommunication.
Yes.
And we have to stop and think about the mechanics of this in the first century, because kicking someone out of a house church in the ancient world wasn't like uninviting them to a neighborhood potluck.
Oh, not at all. It was a devastating blow.
How bad was it?
Well, the early Christian communities operated as vital economic and social safety nets. In a society without state-sponsored welfare, where your social standing dictated your ability to do business, being expelled from your tight-knit community often meant profound financial hardship and social ostracization.
So he is destroying their livelihood.
Diotrephes is leveraging the very survival of his congregation to enforce utter compliance.
He is running a hostile monopoly. He freezes the assets, locks the board out of the building, and fires anyone who questions the new organizational chart.
That's a perfect modern analogy.
He isn't protecting the church. He has taken the church hostage to feed his philoprotoion, his love of being first.
Exactly.
But looking at this from a sociological perspective, why does a community tolerate a Diotrephes? I mean, he is clearly causing massive damage. He's leaving vulnerable people to starve on the road. Why doesn't the group just bypass him or vote him out?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it exposes a dark vulnerability in human psychology.
Which is,
We frequently confuse aggressive arrogance with strong, decisive leadership.
oh, that is so true.
Diotrephes almost certainly didn't frame his actions as a naked power grab. He likely positioned his gatekeeping as necessary protection.
He spun it.
Yes. He probably argued that these traveling strangers were dangerous grifters and that John's distant letters were encroaching on their local independence.
He played the protector.
Authoritarian ambition always cloaks itself in the language of principled vigilance. It manufactures a threat so the leader can present himself as the indispensable savior.
Matthew Henry's commentary captures the root of this perfectly. Let me read what he says. He writes, "Ambition will breed malice against those who oppose it. Church power and church censures are often abused. The pastor is not at absolute liberty, nor lord over God's heritage."
Henry nails it there.
He does. When ego becomes the primary driver of leadership, the community will inevitably fracture. A leader like Diotrephes views anyone else's success, influence, or even basic generosity as a direct threat to his supremacy.
Because the broad, collaborative Catholic spirit of Gaius is fundamentally incompatible with the absolute control required by Diotrephes.
They just can't coexist.
No, and this creates a critical tension in the narrative. Diotrephes is running rampant. He is hijacking the local assembly, slandering the elder, and throwing innocent, compassionate people out into the street.
Right, so how does John, the elder statesman of this movement, respond?
Well, he doesn't retreat, and he doesn't advocate for passive tolerance. He promises a direct confrontation.
In verse 10, John states, "Therefore, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does." Or, as other translations put it, "I will remember his deeds."
Yes.
But wait a minute, I have to challenge John's approach here.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
If we look at this objectively, isn't John just deploying the exact same tactics as Diotrephes?
How do you mean?
Well, Diotrephes flexes his power to crush a perceived rival, and now John is promising to come into town and use his apostolic authority to crush Diotrephes. Isn't this just two massive egos clashing over territory? Isn't John being a hypocrite by answering power with power?
That is a highly critical, necessary question to ask of the text, and it's one scholars grapple with.
So how do they resolve it?
If we turn to Albert Barnes' analysis, he provides a meticulous defense of John's response by drawing a sharp philosophical line between ego-driven vengeance and protective discipline.
Okay, what's the difference?
Barnes argues that there is absolutely no evidence in the text that John is motivated by a private grudge or personal vindictiveness. If Diotrephes had merely insulted John privately, John might have ignored it. I mean, the Christian ethic is full of admonitions to turn the other cheek regarding personal offenses.
Right, the whole bless those who curse you idea.
Exactly. But Diotrephes' actions ceased to be personal the moment he started weaponizing the community's resources.
I see.
Precisely the point Barnes makes. Diotrephes' actions are highly public and deeply destructive. He is literally endangering lives by denying shelter to travelers in a hostile environment. And he is terrorizing the local congregation, severing their social lifelines, simply for practicing kindness.
So he's hurting innocent bystanders.
Yes. Barnes observes that if the character and well-being of these innocent brethren have been injured by being rudely thrust out of their community, then it is morally required that their character be vindicated and the author of the wrong be dealt with suitably.
So it is the difference between gatekeeping to feed your own narcissism and exercising discipline to protect the vulnerable.
That's the core distinction.
If Diotrephes is running a corrupt monopoly, John is stepping in as the regulatory commission with a subpoena.
Exactly.
He isn't acting to elevate himself. He's acting to break the monopoly and restore the open market of hospitality that Gaius represents.
Right. Because true leadership inherently requires the courage to confront bullies.
And that's something we struggle with today.
Oh, massively. There is a pervasive misconception in modern culture, particularly within tight-knit communities or organizations that highly value cohesion, that maintaining peace means avoiding conflict at all costs.
Yeah, don't rock the boat.
Right. We are taught to manage toxic individuals, to work around them, to keep our heads down. But this text argues that tolerating a toxic leader in the name of peace actually destroys the peace of the entire group.
It creates an environment where the most vulnerable members are routinely preyed upon by the most ambitious.
Yes. John is modeling a vital leadership principle here. I will not pretend this abuse isn't happening. I'm going to publicly shine a light on these deeds.
This translates into a very demanding practical application for the listener, because we all encounter these personalities.
Here.
How do you handle conflict and toxicity in your own spheres of influence? When you encounter a Diotrephes in your workplace, on your local school board, or within your family, someone who utilizes gossip to isolate rivals, who controls resources, and who punishes dissent, do you just quietly comply to survive?
Usually, yes. That's the path of least resistance.
Or do you possess the structural courage to calmly, firmly remember their deeds, establish hard boundaries, and protect the people they are marginalizing?
Confronting a Diotrephes is terrifying.
Because they fight back.
Because, as the text outlines, their immediate reflex is to overflow with malicious words against anyone who challenges them. You will be slandered.
Which means enduring that kind of slander requires an unshakable grounding in objective reality. You cannot fight this subjective, shifting gossip of a Diotrephes if your own foundation is fragile.
No, you'll crumble.
And that requirement for unshakable truth brings us to the final character in this triad. After pulling us through the dark, manipulative labyrinth of Diotrephes' ego, John provides a sudden palate cleanser.
He does. He points to a third man, Demetrius, who serves as the ultimate antidote to toxicity.
We find this in verse 12. John writes, "Demetrius has the testimony of all and of the truth itself. Yes, we also testify, and you know that our testimony is true."
Demetrius is fascinating.
So we have analyzed the generous patron Gaius, we have dissected the toxic authoritarian Diotrephes, and now we arrive at the solid bedrock of Demetrius. What elevates Demetrius to this standard?
It hinges entirely on the phrase. He has the good report of all men and of the truth itself.
And of the truth itself.
Yeah.
That is a staggering philosophical concept.
It really is. Matthew Henry contemplates this in his commentary, noting, "Some have a good report, but not of the truth itself. Happy are those whose spirit and conduct commend them before God and men."
Wait, unpack that a bit. What does Henry mean? Some have a good report, but not of the truth itself.
Well, what John is communicating is that Demetrius's stellar reputation is not the result of clever public relations.
Oh, I see.
It isn't a carefully curated image designed to manipulate public opinion.
In modern terms, he isn't a person with a pristine, heavily filtered social media presence who is actually a nightmare to his family behind closed doors.
Right. His public brand is not a fabrication. The objective reality of his life seamlessly aligns with his public reputation.
The truth itself bears witness to him.
Yes. If you were to put reality, on the witness stand and interrogate the hidden, mundane details of Demetrius's daily life, reality would testify, yes, this man is exactly who he claims to be.
He possesses a universal, deeply integrated integrity.
Exactly. He doesn't need to control the narrative like Diotrephes because the truth naturally defends him.
So when we pull back and look at the architecture of this entire letter, what does this all mean? John hasn't just written a greeting. He has laid out a comprehensive map of human potential and failure.
He has provided a diagnostic tool for every society, really.
Let's summarize it.
Okay. Through Gaius, we learn the mechanics of profound generosity. He demonstrates how to leverage our resources, our homes, and our capital to become joint partners in the advancement of truth.
He shows us the world-building power of an open hand.
Yes. And then, through Diotrephes, we are warned about the destructive, isolating power of unchecked ambition. She shows us the violence of a closed fist and how the desperate need to be the center of attention will inevitably cause a person to cannibalize their own community.
And finally, through Demetrius, we witness the quiet, enduring power of aligned integrity. He proves that a life backed by the truth itself is the only sustainable path.
It's an incredible triad of characters.
It is. But we have to acknowledge the massive obstacles to applying this map in the modern world.
Oh, there are huge obstacles.
If we look at our algorithms, our corporate structures, and our political arenas, the Diotrephes model frequently appears to be the undisputed winning strategy.
It often is in the short term.
Right. The loud, arrogant, self-promoting gatekeeper is usually the one who secures the promotion, consolidates the power, and dominates the news cycle.
While the Gaiuses and the Demetriuses are quietly maintaining the actual infrastructure of society.
Exactly. Often entirely unrecognized and unrewarded by the systems they sustain.
Yeah, it's a frustrating reality.
It requires an immense, almost painful level of discipline to read verse 11, where John instructs, "Beloved, don't imitate that which is evil, but that which is good," and actually follow through when the evil seems to be winning every popularity contest and acquiring all the resources.
The resistance to that reality is profound. But the underlying argument of this ancient text, and the commentaries that dissect it, is that the prosperity of a Diotrephes is an inherently fragile illusion.
Fragile? How so?
His empire is constructed entirely on fear, information control, and malicious gossip. The moment the fear breaks, or the moment a regulatory force like John arrives, the facade crumbles.
It has no foundation.
Exactly. But the prosperity of Gaius and Demetrius, the deep prosperity of the soul that we started this whole conversation with, is unshakable.
They are not merely acquiring temporary power. They are constructing a legacy of truth that easily outlasts the chaotic noise of ambition.
They are playing the long game.
Which brings us to the fascinating conclusion of this brief letter. John wraps up his thoughts by commenting on the very medium he is utilizing to communicate all of this heavy wisdom.
Yeah, verses 13 and 14.
He writes, "I had many things to write to you, but I am unwilling to write to you with ink and pen, but I hope to see you soon. Then we will speak face to face."
It is a deeply humanizing, almost vulnerable detail to end on.
It really is.
John, despite his authority and the urgency of the situation with Diotrephes, recognizes the severe limitations of his technology, in this case, ink and papyrus.
He knows a letter isn't going to fix everything.
Right. Matthew Henry observes this detail, noting that a little personal conference can spare the immense time, trouble, and cost of numerous letters. He points out that good Christians and good friends should inherently desire the physical presence of one another.
Even in antiquity, they understood that certain things, especially the resolution of complex communal trauma or the deepening of genuine friendship, required the intimacy and nuance of physical proximity.
Exactly. You can't lead purely from a distance.
It serves as a striking indictment of our digital age, honestly. We constantly attempt to resolve deep interpersonal conflicts, address complex organizational toxicity, or offer profound emotional support through rapid-fire text messages, emails, or fragmented digital communication.
And it almost always falls short, or worse, gets disastrously misinterpreted.
John is effectively saying, this situation is too important for text. Put the pen down. We need to inhabit the same physical space and look each other in the eye.
Because face-to-face communication strips away the ability to endlessly posture.
You can't hide behind a screen.
No, it demands a level of physical presence, immediate accountability, and vulnerability that screens and keyboards or ink and papyrus simply cannot replicate. If you want to build the kind of resilient, welcoming community that Gaius was fostering, you cannot do it entirely from a distance. You have to share the room.
It is the final practical piece of wisdom in the letter.
Yeah, it's a brilliant closing note.
As we conclude this deep dive into the short, explosive text of 3 John, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over in the coming days.
Let's hear it.
We have examined the mirror this ancient text holds up to humanity. We have seen the radical open door of Gaius, the violently slammed door of Diotrephes, and the unshakable, quiet ground of Demetrius.
3 very clear paths.
Think about your own patterns of behavior this week. When you walk into a room, whether it is your corporate office, your living room, or a community gathering, what is your underlying motive?
That's the real test.
Are you immediately scanning the hierarchy, looking for ways to be served, praised, and recognized, like Diotrephes? Or are you scanning the room, looking for the vulnerable, the strangers, and the quiet workers, figuring out how you can welcome, support, and elevate them like Gaius?
The answer to that question might just reveal the true prosperity of your soul.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.